to all living mortals that whosoever opens this chest of demons will release 13 of the most terrifying ghosts upon the face of the earth.
Scooby-Doo, a cartoon series rapidly approaching its 50th anniversary and one engraved firmly into pop culture history. I'm not going to go into the full history of the franchise here, as I covered it pretty well in the review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated elsewhere on this channel, but there is a little bit of backstory involved before we get to the main thrust of this episode. What a lot of casual viewers don't realize is that by the closing years of the 1970s, Scooby-Doo in any form was in danger of being cancelled. Between two networks, Scooby and the Gang had been part of Saturday morning cartoons for 10 years, and the traditional formula was starting to grow stale. This led to the inclusion of a new character to the roster, Scooby's brash and headstrong nephew, Scrappy-Doo. And, love him or hate him, Scrappy did what he was meant to do, save the show's ratings. However, it worked a little too well. After the first season of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, the show was retooled to focus more on Scrappy, to the point that long-running characters Fred, Velma, and Daphne were dropped from the show. The 1980s version of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo was paired off for 3 seasons with Richie Rich and a Ruby Spears production, The New Adventures of the Puppy. This was where, despite popular belief, the show took its first steps toward having real monsters appear in the series. This version was split up into 3 7-minute shorts featuring the various misadventures of Scooby, Scrappy, and Shaggy, usually encountering some kind of monster or creature in the process. In the final season of this version, a new series of shorts introduced Sheriff Yabba-Doo and Scrappy having pseudo-Wild West adventures. By the 3rd season of this version, things had started wearing a little thin, and in 1983, veteran animation writer Tom Ruegger was put in charge of the Scooby franchise. I have no information on why the shorts format was abandoned, but what I do know is that Ruegger was ambivalent about Scooby-Doo, having never watched the show until he was put in charge. Whatever the rationale, the show was retooled again into the new Scooby and Scrappy show, and sort of returned the series to its classic format. Daphne was returned to the Gang, Scrappy got a minor personality change so he wasn't as impulsive and brash, and the show now featured the 4 of them working for a teen magazine, which led them into a series of short 11-minute mysteries. In 1984, the 2nd season renamed the series The New Scooby-Doo Mysteries and occasionally featured full half-hour stories with Fred and Velma making guest appearances. Ruegger's influence on the show made the focus more on comedy, usually involving more slapstick and silly costumes for the gang, foreshadowing work Ruegger would later do on shows like Tiny Toon Adventures and Animaniacs. 1984 also saw a major blockbuster hit theaters. Ghostbusters was a runaway hit, and it opened the door for many production firms, including Hanna-Barbera, to try to cash in on the ghost-chasing craze in kids' media. And so, in 1985, Scooby-Doo morphed again, ditching the mystery pretext entirely and turning the show into a full-on supernatural comedy, The 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. The show uses a fairly standard Pandora's Box-style plot. In an ancient crypt in the Himalayas, there's an artifact known as the Chest of Demons. It contains 13 of the most malevolent demons and ghosts ever seen on Earth. The chest can only be opened by the living, which means that the ghostly caretakers of the chest, Bogle and Weird, can't open it themselves. And obviously, only a complete idiot would ever voluntarily open the chest.
Well, gang, like here we are, Honolulu, Hawaii. Oh boy, just get a load of those white sandy beaches.
Look again, Lindbergh. That's not sand, it's snow.
Stranded in the village near the crypt, the gang soon encounters preteen con artist Flim Flam, who Ruegger did not like, citing years later in interviews that the character was probably forced on the production team due to demographics research from the network, and warlock Vincent Van Ghoul, who, in a major get for Saturday morning TV, was played by horror icon Vincent Price. Van Ghoul is basically Price himself, but with magic powers. After a very strange musical interlude,
to all the ghouls I've loved before, who travel in and out my door, I'm glad they came along. I dedicate this song to all the ghouls I've loved before.
And a brief period where Daphne becomes a werewolf, she gets better. The gang finds their plane has been dragged into the temple where the crypt is. During their search, Shaggy and Scooby are tricked into opening the Chest of Demons, unleashing the 13 ghosts. Vincent reveals that since they let the ghosts out, they're the only ones who can put them back, thus leading our heroes on their quest. These ghosts include Now, there is some debate among Scooby fans as to whether or not the ship captain from the episode Ship of Ghouls counts as one of the 13 ghosts, since no one explicitly states in the episode that he is one of them. And you may have noticed that the list is incomplete, because much like most quest-themed cartoons of the 80s, there was never a real resolution to the story. The series ran through its 13 episodes, reran the first one once, then was removed from air and replaced with reruns of Laugh Olympics for the remainder of the 1985-1986 season. Which, honestly, isn't really surprising. Most network executives and cartoon production companies didn't really care about continuity back in those days, figuring kids would watch whatever the hell was on the screen. As a result, depending on who you ask, the gang only recaptured 11 or 12 of the 13 ghosts before cancellation. And it's not hard to see why. The tone of the show is wildly inconsistent. Some episodes commit to the quest wholeheartedly and go out of their way to make the ghosts the gang encounter menacing and effective. Others, particularly those written by Ruger himself, lean heavily on the comedy and don't really care about the basic premise of the show, instead using it for fourth wall breaks.
The 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, starring Bernie Gumption.
I'm the Splat, another ghostie. Are you ready for action, Uncle Bernie?
This is the worst! Where's the real Scooby-Doo? Scooby's not on anymore. I think I'll go in my room and stare at the ceiling.
Pop culture parodies.
Oh, it would just be incredibly decent if I could have your autograph.
Of course.
Oh, thank you very much. Very, very much. Thank you, thank you. This is great, I must say.
Hey, this must be one of those self-help books. Yeah.
However, you must do one thing. You must join me at Stonehenge at midnight tonight to recite spell number 13.
Spell 13?
At midnight tonight? Certainly.
And the aforementioned silly costumes.
When trouble starts brewing and we're really in a jam,
Like what'll we do? No.
We give them the old flim flam.
yes, we give them the old flim flam.
Now, admittedly, all the episodes rely on those jokes quite a bit, but you can easily tell the difference between a writer who is taking the premise seriously and a writer who isn't. Most of the time, Ruger himself is not. Animation-wise, this version of the show suffers from a lot of the same issues most cartoons around then had. Limited budgets, limited animation, sloppy production value, and a lot of references and jokes which are ridiculously dated now. But to be honest with you, this is my favorite Scooby-Doo series. I love the premise, I like the recurring characters. Yes, even Scrappy and Flim Flam, and even the sillier jokes still manage to make me laugh. Vincent Price automatically makes anything he's in 10 times better, no matter how silly it is, and even with the flaws it has, there's some charm to it. And for me and other fans of the series, it was always irksome when we realized years later that all 13 ghosts were never actually caught. Which is why it surprised everyone when it was announced that the first direct-to-DVD Scooby-Doo movie for 2019 was actually going to serve as a much-delayed finale. Scooby-Doo and the Curse of the 13 Ghosts is due for release in February of 2019 and will see the gang resolving this long, unfinished business. Fred and Velma, who were absent from 13 Ghosts, will have their first encounter with the Chest of Demons, Maurice LaMarche will step in for Vincent Price as Vincent Van Ghoul, and while the trailer seems to indicate the return of an older Flim Flam, no word on whether or not Scrappy will be seen or even mentioned. The cancellation of 13 Ghosts was, in fact, the end of the regular run of Scooby-Doo on Saturday mornings that had been constant since 1969. The next Scooby series wouldn't be seen until 1989 with a pup named Scooby-Doo, which made the gang all junior high age and utilized a more squash and stretch style of animation which had come back into vogue with the release of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Future Scooby series would pretty much follow in the show's footsteps, creating their own new continuity. What's New Scooby-Doo seemed to pretty much run off the world established by the live-action movies. Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue did its own thing, which still perplexes everybody to this day. Mystery Incorporated brought us the darkest and most detailed Scooby TV series to date. And Be Cool Scooby-Doo brought back a purely comedy-themed series with all new designs to go with it. Love it or hate it, the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo was a truly unique entry into the franchise, and I, like many fans of it, look forward to seeing how the story finally resolves next year. Even if it did take 34 years to finally reach the end of the story. I'm Aaron Mills. Join me next time for another edition of Saturd80s.
And so our heroes once again have foiled the schemes of ghosts and men, led by one so brave and true, no one else but Scooby-Dooby-Doo!